Yet again, another incident between Lando and Max has dominated the headlines and overshadowed the rest of the US Grand Prix, despite the fact that Charles Leclerc took a brilliant Ferrari 1-2 and now gets within 22 points of Lando in the fight for second in the championship, which in my opinion is the really big story coming out of Austin. Nevertheless, let's get straight into it because it was definitely a controversial incident between Max and Lando, and it was kind of an addition to a pretty strange weekend of stewarding across the entirety of the US Grand Prix weekend. In terms of why the stewards decided to give Lando a penalty and not Max, this is what they said in their ruling after the race. Car 4 was overtaking Car 1 on the outside, but was not level with Car 1 at the apex. Therefore, under the driving standard guidelines, Car 4 had lost the right to the corner. Accordingly, as Car 4 left the track and returned in front of Car 1, it is deemed to be a case of leaving the track and gaining a lasting advantage. And now after the race, I had so many conflicting feelings about both this incident and also just the way the race as a whole was adjudicated by the FIA, because I didn't feel like we had consistency. I don't really feel like things actually make sense in terms of what the FIA think that good racing and the racing guidelines actually should be. And I guess I want to start this by saying that I 100% think that Lando Norris deserved to get a penalty, because even though I do want to see kind of aggressive and hard racing, there has to be a line somewhere, and this is the line in terms of what is allowed and what isn't allowed. You can't enter a corner behind a car, go 4 wheels off the track, and then finish the corner ahead of the car and think that you're going to keep the position. I think it was really naive, the fact that McLaren actually thought that they were going to be able to keep their position, but nevertheless, that is what I want to get across as my number one point. I definitely think Lando deserved to get a penalty, but I didn't really understand how Verstappen didn't also deserve a penalty based off what we had seen throughout the weekend. And now, as you can tell by the FIA statement in terms of why they decided to penalise Lando and not penalise Max, all they basically cared about was whoever got to the apex first. Now, the problem with that for me is that yes, Max made the apex first, which by the regulations entitles him to keep the position, but he did so by outbraking himself, braking way too late, defending the inside of the corner. And it's also worth noting actually that if you look at the kind of wheel-to-wheel battle, Lando had kind of overtaken Max, so this was Max not just defending but actually retaking a position that he just lost, and he did it by braking way too late, which yes, allowed him to get to the apex first, but as a consequence, he also ran off the track with all 4 wheels, and you could also argue forced Lando off the track. This to me is actually the crux of the problem, because had Max made the corner, and by that I mean not just the apex, I mean the actual corner, by keeping at least 1 wheel within the white line, then I think there would have been any problem for me, because it would have been a great defensive maneuver, just yet more fantastic battling for Max Verstappen. And I should say, he did a fantastic job up until that point. Lando was not getting past him. Max was using all the tricks in the book to get the perfect exit onto that back straight, but it was just he also ended up running wide, which kind of nullifies the fact that he didn't deserve to keep the position, because in a way, he also forced Lando off the track with him. You know, then you can get into the discussion, well, do 2 wrongs make a right? And that is why my argument is, I think considering the penalties that were given throughout that race, I think in that scenario, both of them deserve the penalty, because neither of them actually made the track trying to fight for the same position. I think my biggest problem with the FIA is that they got so hung up on the fact that whoever makes the apex first can basically have free reign to do what they want, even if it means running off the track. And that to me just makes absolutely no sense, because the apex is a really arbitrary part of the corner. Just because you make it first doesn't mean that you can outbrake yourself and be out of control to the point where you can run people off the track. And it also kind of brings into the discussion what happened on lap 1, because we saw a very similar incident at that exact corner between Sainz and Verstappen. This time it was actually Sainz who was attacking Verstappen in kind of the same way that Max was trying to retake the position on Lando, and again, both of them went off the track. On that occasion, Sainz actually almost, I think, also got to the apex potentially first, maybe they were side by side. But once again, Max was, in his eyes, forced off the track on lap 1 in the same way that Lando, in his eyes, was forced off the track at the end of the race, and in both occasions the driver on the outside maintained the position, but only Lando got penalised for that incident. I've often said on my channel that Max Verstappen, more than any other driver that I have seen in my time of watching Formula 1, pushes the rules of the FIA, pushes the rules of racing, basically more than anyone else. It's a bit of a you live by the sword, you die by the sword kind of approach, because yes, while sometimes that does mean that he gets into more crashes and more incidents than any other top driver that I have seen that's kind of in the same bracket as Max Verstappen, it also means that it makes him one of the best drivers in wheel-to-wheel combat because he gets away with it more than anyone else because he pushes the rules more than anyone else. So it kind of depends where you as a person fall on what you think is right and wrong in wheel-to-wheel situations. I mean, what happened yesterday with him kind of defending very aggressively and just going off the track, which I think was over the limit, it was kind of similar to what we saw in Sao Paulo 21 and Qatar 21. Two races where I think Max went over the limit, and at the time, because of the pressure of the championship, it was actually a little bit desperate, I think, from him. So it's these kind of incidents where I think Max goes over the limit, and I just don't think that the FIA really got it right yesterday in terms of you either penalize both of them or none of them. Because of how they were penalizing throughout the entire weekend, basically whenever someone went wheel to wheel and potentially squeezed someone out, you kind of have to lean on penalizing both of them in that scenario because that is the precedent that they set throughout the race. When it comes to Lando and McLaren, I think it's very important to separate what happened at the end of the race and his weekend as a whole. Now, this was a bad weekend by Lando Norris, and I'm not talking in terms of a title fight because even though he lost out to Max Verstappen in terms of the championship, I have said consistently that to me, I have never considered a title fight. Lando to me has never been close enough for me to call it a title fight, but he lost out yet again to Max Verstappen, and actually, Charles Leclerc now being only 22 points behind him. Like I said, that to me is the really big story. He lost out in the sprint on the final lap to Sainz. He left the door open under pressure again on the opening lap from pole position at turn 1. And even though yes, Max was very aggressive and did go over the line, kind of pushing Lando in turn 1, to me the main problem was Lando leaving the door open in the first place. That should never have happened, and yet once again he made that mistake on the opening lap, and even when he did catch up to Max, it took him way too long to overtake him with the tyre advantage that he had. I also think that at the end of the race, Lando in his heart of hearts would have known that he is going to get a 5-second penalty, and I think he would have also known that he was not going to be able to get past Max. Had they swapped positions and Lando would have had to try again, I don't think he would have been able to get past him. And so I think both McLaren and also Lando knew that his best option was basically just to eat the 5-second penalty and basically nullify it by getting a 5-second gap, which of course he just missed out on, as officially Max finished ahead of Lando by just 9/10. Even though Max and Lando are going to get all of the headlines over their incident, my biggest frustration coming away from this weekend was actually with the FIA and how they were over-regulating the racing. If you look at all of the incidents that happened, I just don't understand why they were so trigger happy to give out so many penalties. The one incident that I do think was fair to give a penalty to was the Gasly and Albon one. In that situation, Pierre was behind Alex pretty much the entire way and did genuinely overtake Alex off track whilst Alex kept all 4 wheels within the white lines, and that to me is the line that is worthy of a penalty. However, when it comes to Piastri's overtake on Gasly, Russell's overtake on Bottas, and Tsunoda's overtake on Albon, even though all of those dive bombs were very aggressive, were very late and right on the limit of what is fair, all of those drivers were able to get their braking done, get to the apex, and stay within the white lines, unlike Max in the example with Lando, and yet for some reason, all of those drivers were deemed to have forced the driver on the outside off the track. I just don't understand how you can look at those and think that they are so over the line that they warrant a penalty, but then what Max did, yes, getting to the apex first, but going all 4 wheels off the track, doesn't warrant a penalty if he also pushed Lando off the track. And now, I know that it might sound like I'm pinning all of the blame on Max, but I really am not. My frustration is with the FIA and the way they go about judging these wheel-to-wheel situations. To me, it's becoming a little bit too similar to VAR in football. They're trying to define every single racing situation basically in black and white with these arbitrary rules like whoever gets to the apex first. The problem is that racing is a very dynamic situation. No 2 incidents are actually millimeter identical. The stewards need to have more flexibility and actually a little bit more ambiguity in what is and isn't fair racing. Because dishing out all of these penalties for what in my mind is very aggressive but is fair racing is gonna set a very dangerous precedent going forward, and it's also going to actively discourage drivers from being aggressive in the future, which in the end is what we want to see. Well, there you have it. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments below. I very much look forward to reading them. And if you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated. And I'll see you in the next one.